20 best forgotten groups of the 1950s that have fallen off the radar. What if the greatest sounds of the 1950s didn't come from the names you know, but from the ones you forgot? Get ready to uncover 20 legendary bands who shaped rock and roll, electrified dance halls, and then vanished into history. Their stories and their music deserve a second chance to shine. Let's bring them back. The Everly Brothers. When Don and Phil Everly stepped into the spotlight in 1956, the world of popular music changed forever. With nothing more than acoustic guitars and their unmistakable sibling harmonies, the Everly Brothers created a sound that was both fresh and timeless. Their early hits, like Wake Up Little Susie and Bye Bye Love, weren't just catchy tunes. They were lightning rods for a generation of teens navigating love, heartbreak, and growing up in a changing world. But their rise to stardom didn't happen overnight. Born into a musical family, Don and Phil got their start performing with their parents, Ike and Margaret, as the Everly family on local radio stations in the 1940s. That early training grounded them in both discipline and showmanship, giving them an edge when Nashville came calling. Music legend Chet Atkins saw their potential and opened doors that led to their first big breaks. In 1960, the brothers made a bold move to Warner Brothers Records, and it paid off in a huge way. Their debut single for the label, Kathy's Clown, skyrocketed to number 1, selling over 8 million copies. Not only was it their biggest hit, but it was also the first song Warner Brothers ever released in the UK, a sign of the Everlys' international star power. Their influence can still be heard today in countless artists who borrowed from their rich vocal blend and emotional storytelling. The Bunnies. Back in the vibrant post-war era of the 1950s, when jukeboxes were king and teenagers were just discovering their cultural voice, one group burst onto the scene with undeniable energy: the Bunnies. They weren't just another doo-wop outfit blending harmonies on street corners. No, these guys had style, swagger, and a spark that made them stand out in a sea of new talent. Decked out in sharp suits with slicked back hair, the Bunnies brought a dynamic mix of charm and attitude to every performance. Their harmonies hit just right, tight, soulful, and perfectly in tune with the youthful rebellion bubbling beneath the surface of 1950s America. They gave voice to a restless generation looking for more than just the polished hits of the past. Their songs? Bold, catchy, and pulsing with the desire for freedom. Though they never quite reached the enduring fame of their peers like the Platters or the Drifters, the Bunnies were a crucial part of rock and roll's early DNA. You can still hear echoes of their sound in the music that came later, as countless bands picked up their vibe and ran with it. The Platters. Formed in Los Angeles in 1953, this vocal group brought together some of the smoothest voices of the era. At the heart was Tony Williams, whose rich, soaring tenor gave the group its emotional center. Joining him were David Lynch's sweet tenor, Alex Hodges' warm baritone, and Herb Reed's steady bass. Later, they added Zola Taylor, the first female member, whose deep, velvety contralto brought a stunning new texture to their sound. Their big break came in 1956, thanks to savvy manager and producer Buck Ram, who secured them a deal with Mercury Records. That same year, they released Only You, a tender ballad that instantly connected with fans. It wasn't just a hit, it was a turning point. Soon after, The Great Pretender took over the charts, staying at number 1 on the R&B chart for 11 straight weeks. The Platters weren't just hitmakers, they were cultural icons. Their performances in the film Rock Around the Clock introduced them to an even wider audience. From 1956 to 1960, they released a string of unforgettable classics: Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Twilight Time, My Prayer, and more. Each song proved they could swing between doo-wop, pop, and heartfelt ballads with ease. Decades later, their influence still echoes through popular music. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990, the Platters remain one of the most beloved and influential vocal groups of the 20th century. Bill Haley and his Comets. When you talk about the birth of rock and roll, you can't skip Bill Haley and his Comets. They weren't just part of the movement. They helped kick it off with a bang. At the center was Bill Haley, a larger-than-life performer with a flair for rhythm guitar and a voice that got crowds dancing from the first note. But Haley didn't do it alone. He pulled together a dream team of musicians who each brought something special to the table. Frankie Beecher shredded the lead guitar with style and flair. His riffs were bold, fast, and unforgettable. Billy Williamson added a splash of country with his steel guitar, giving their sound a rootsy edge. Then there was Johnny Grande on piano. His playing added warmth and richness. Marshall Lytle's upright bass kept the groove solid, while Dick Richards laid down pounding drum beats that gave their music unstoppable momentum. Their defining moment came in 1954 with Rock Around the Clock. That song wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, rock and roll had a sound, a face, and a future. And it wasn't just America that felt the tremors. Bill Haley and his Comets went global, touring the world and spreading the gospel of rock. The Penguins. In the golden age of doo-wop, few groups captured the heart of the genre quite like the Penguins. These Los Angeles natives had a gift for turning simple street corner harmonies into musical magic. With playful lyrics, toe-tapping rhythms, and irresistible charm, they made a lasting mark on the 1950s music scene. Tracks like Walking Down Broadway, Be Mine or Be a Fool, and Kiss a Fool Goodbye were more than just catchy tunes. They were snapshots of teenage life, bursting with joy, hope, and a touch of mischief. But if the Penguins are remembered for one song above all, it's the timeless classic Earth Angel. Released in 1954, this heartfelt ballad wasn't just a doo-wop hit. It was a cultural milestone. Originally recorded as an R&B single, Earth Angel unexpectedly crossed over to the pop charts, capturing the hearts of teens from all walks of life. Its haunting harmonies and tender lyrics struck a chord with listeners, making it a prom night anthem and a slow dance favorite for generations. Earth Angel became one of the first independent label records to make such a huge impact on both R&B and pop charts, paving the way for crossover success in the music industry. Did any of these songs bring back memories for you? Tell us which one and what it reminds you of. Flatt and Scruggs. When Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs teamed up, they didn't just form a band, they helped redefine American roots music. Drawing from the deep traditions of Appalachian folk, the duo added fresh twists that breathed new life into bluegrass. With Flatt's warm, steady rhythm guitar and smooth vocals paired with Scruggs' lightning-fast, three-finger banjo picking, they created a sound that felt both timeless and excitingly new. Their band, the Foggy Mountain Boys, became a sensation in the 1950s. They didn't just play shows, they brought bluegrass to the mainstream through the power of radio and TV. Weekly appearances on the Grand Ole Opry and the Martha White Flower radio show gave them a national platform, beaming their toe-tapping, soul-stirring sound into homes across America. Whether it was a barn dance or a living room, their music connected with people from all walks of life. Then came their breakthrough into pop culture history. The Ballad of Jed Clampett, the theme song for the Beverly Hillbillies. Suddenly, bluegrass was everywhere. The tune hit #1 on the Billboard country charts and introduced millions of Americans to a genre many had never heard before: the Coasters. In the lively, transformative world of 1950s music, the Coasters stood out like a lightning bolt. This powerhouse group of African-American musicians wasn't just ahead of the curve, they were reshaping it. Blending rhythm and blues with the raw edge of early rock and roll, the Coasters created a signature sound that was upbeat, bold, and undeniably fun. But they didn't stop at just making great music. They turned every performance into an all-out show. What really made the Coasters legendary was their ability to mix sharp humor with incredible musical talent. Their concerts were part comedy act, part dance party, and all around unforgettable. On stage, they told stories, sometimes wild, sometimes heartfelt, that made audiences laugh, dance, and feel something real. And their hits? Yakety Yak, Charlie Brown, Run Red Run, Little Egypt, and Along Came Jones. Each one was packed with wit, groove, and insight. They weren't just catchy songs, they were snapshots of American life, cleverly disguised as chart-topping tunes. Their music connected with everyday people because it was about everyday people. The Coasters didn't just climb the charts, they crossed boundaries. Their lyrics spoke to life's chaos and comedy, and their beats made sure you were moving while listening. The Clovers. Long before they hit the big time, the Clovers were just a few high school kids with a dream. Back in the mid-1940s, Harold Hal Lucas, Billy Shelton, and Robert Woods formed a trio at Armstrong High School in Washington, D.C., bonding over music and harmonies. It was Lucas who came up with the name The Clovers, and before long they added John Buddy Bailey, whose smooth tenor voice would eventually take the lead on many of their biggest hits. Inspired by trailblazing groups like the Ravens and the Orioles, the Clovers built their sound on tight vocal blends and infectious rhythm. Their early hits, including Don't You Know I Love You and the wildly fun One Mint Julep, helped define the sound of early R&B, upbeat, catchy, and full of swagger. They were soon making waves and climbing the charts, known for their energy and sharp vocal interplay. Then came a turning point. In 1955, they slowed things down with Blue Velvet, a ballad that showed a softer, more romantic side. It didn't top the charts, but it turned heads. Their next release, Devil or Angel, became a massive hit, reaching number 3 on the R&B charts. Yet it also marked the end of their chart-topping days with Atlantic. Ironically, Blue Velvet and Devil or Angel, their most recognized songs today, were departures from their original style. Later covers, especially Bobby V's version of Devil or Angel, gained even more attention, overshadowing the Clovers' legacy. But make no mistake, they were pioneers, carving out a path for the vocal groups that followed, and leaving behind a catalog rich in both rhythm and soul. The Crickets. Out of the dusty plains of Lubbock, Texas, came a band that would forever change the sound of rock and roll, the Crickets. Formed in the mid-1950s, this tight-knit group brought something fresh and fearless to the music scene. At the center of it all was Buddy Holly, a young talent with thick-rimmed glasses, a Stratocaster slung over his shoulder, and a voice that blended country soul with rock swagger. Alongside him were Nicky Sullivan on rhythm guitar, Joe B. Malden on bass, and Jerry Allison laying down the beat with crisp, inventive drumming. Their breakout moment came in 1957 with the smash hit, That'll Be the Day. It wasn't just a song, it was a cultural spark. Buddy's hiccup-like vocal delivery was instantly recognizable, and the band's chemistry gave their records a raw, magnetic energy. Teens everywhere connected with their sound. It was fresh, rebellious, and completely theirs. But just as the Crickets were hitting their stride, tragedy struck. In 1959, Buddy Holly died in a plane crash at only 22 years old, cutting short one of music's brightest lights. Despite the loss, the Crickets didn't fade away. They kept going, changing members but carrying the spirit of Buddy's music with them. Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. When Bebop-A-Lula hit the airwaves in 1956, it didn't just launch a song, it sparked a revolution. Gene Vincent's snarling voice, slicked back hair, and raw energy turned heads instantly. With a swagger that echoed Elvis but a grit that was all his own, Vincent captured something electric. And at his side were the Blue Caps, a band that did more than just back him up. They helped define rockabilly's sound. The Blue Caps were tight, sharp, and wildly talented. Lead guitarist Cliff Gallup was a standout. His lightning-fast riffs and solos gave the band its unmistakable edge. Alongside him, rhythm guitarist Willie Williams, bassist Jack Neal, and drummer Dickie Harrell brought drive, rhythm, and that gritty barroom feel that made their songs come alive. Together, they created a sound that was both rebellious and polished. Music made for dancing, cruising, and shaking up the status quo. But Gene Vincent's story is tinged with tragedy. After surviving a devastating car crash that took the life of fellow rocker Eddie Cochran, Vincent's health and career began to decline. Addiction and chronic pain followed, and he passed away far too young at just 36. Still, his legacy lives on. Gene Vincent was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998, and the Blue Caps followed in 2012. Their contributions laid the groundwork for generations of rockers, proving that sometimes one song really can change everything. Do you think today's music is missing the raw energy and soul of the 1950s? Comment yes or no and tell us why. The Drifters. The Drifters weren't just a vocal group, they were a musical institution. Their story began in 1953 when legendary producer Ahmet Ertegun teamed up with Clyde McPhatter, fresh from his stint with Billy Ward and his Dominoes. McPhatter's powerhouse vocals gave the Drifters an electrifying edge right from the start. Early hits like Money Honey and Such a Night quickly put them on the map, establishing them as rising stars in the world of R&B. But the Drifters weren't done evolving. When Ben E. King stepped in, he brought a soulful vulnerability that transformed their sound. His voice gave birth to a string of hits that blended doo-wop with gospel and pop influences. There Goes My Baby was a game-changer, becoming their first #1 hit and paving the way for timeless songs like This Magic Moment, Save the Last Dance for Me, and I Count the Tears. Even after King left to pursue a solo career, the hits kept coming. With Rudy Lewis on lead vocals, the Drifters continued to shine with tracks like Up on the Roof, On Broadway, and the beachside ballad Under the Boardwalk. Lineup changes came and went, but the sound remained consistent, smooth, heartfelt, and full of soul. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988, the Drifters' legacy is set in stone. Their music captured the spirit of the times and still resonates with anyone who's ever loved, lost, or danced the night away. Billy Ward and his Dominoes. While most R&B groups of the 1950s rose from gospel choirs and street corners, Billy Ward brought something entirely different to the table: refined musicianship. A classically trained pianist and music theorist, Ward wasn't just another bandleader. He was a composer, an arranger, and a visionary. After serving in World War II, he returned home to pursue music full-time, studying at both the Art Institute of Chicago and the prestigious Juilliard School in New York. There, he not only polished his craft, but also became a voice coach, training the very talent that would help define his legacy. From that talent pool, Ward formed the Dominoes. Leading the group was a young Clyde McPhatter, whose vibrant tenor would later help shape soul music. Alongside him were Charlie White, tenor, Joe Lamont, baritone, and Bill Brown, bass, all guided by Ward's tight musical direction. Their harmonies were razor-sharp, and their sound was polished yet powerful. Their first big success came with Do Something For Me, but it was their next track, 60-Minute Man, that made history. With a bold, cheeky lyric and a beat you couldn't ignore, the song topped the R&B charts and broke into the pop world, a rare feat for a black group at the time. Little Richard and the Upsetters. If you've ever felt the raw electricity in a rock and roll song, the kind that makes your feet move and your heart race, chances are you're hearing the influence of Little Richard and the Upsetters. Bursting onto the scene with unmatched energy, Little Richard didn't just perform, he erupted. With his sky-high pompadour, outrageous flair, and unmistakable woo, he became one of the most unforgettable figures in music history. But behind every wild scream and piano slam was the Upsetters, his powerhouse backing band. These guys weren't just keeping up, they were helping to drive the rocket. Together, they created a high-octane fusion of rock, gospel, and rhythm and blues that had never been heard quite like this before. Songs like Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, Lucille, and Good Golly Miss Molly became instant classics, defining an entire generation of rock and roll. But they didn't stop at just rock. Little Richard and the Upsetters laid the foundation for funk before funk even had a name. Tracks like Rip It Up and Keep a Knockin' featured tight grooves, syncopated beats, and raw, pulsing energy that paved the way for James Brown and everyone who came after. Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. Before rock and roll exploded onto the mainstream, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters were already lighting a fire under the music world. Ballard's journey began when he joined the group originally known as the Royals, a tight-knit R&B outfit led by bandleader and musical innovator Johnny Otis. The lineup was stacked with talent: tenors Henry Booth and Jackie Wilson, and baritones Charles Sutton and Lawson Sonny Woods. Both Wilson and Woods would go on to achieve their own legendary careers, proving that this group was something special. Their early spark came with Get It in 1952, a lively R&B number that hinted at what was to come. But in 1954, they changed the game with Work With Me, Annie. Its sultry groove and cheeky lyrics caused a stir, leading to radio bans across the country. But teenagers didn't care. They bought the record in droves. It shot to number 1 on the R&B charts and flirted with the pop charts too, despite the controversy. And they didn't stop there. Follow-ups like Annie Had a Baby and Sexy Ways kept pushing boundaries. Their songs were bold, full of swagger and dripping with rhythm. Songs that said out loud what others only whispered. For a generation of teens hungry for something daring, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters delivered. They weren't just provocative. They were pioneers of the pulse that would soon become rock and roll. Johnny Otis and his Orchestra. Long before genre blending became a buzzword, Johnny Otis was already breaking musical boundaries. His journey began in the 1940s, and from the start, he wasn't just a performer, he was a visionary. A skilled bandleader, composer, and pianist, Otis gathered some of the era's top talents: Wynanie Harris, Charles Brown, and saxophonist Illinois Jacquet, to form a powerhouse orchestra that turned heads with its smooth mix of jazz, blues, and early R&B. Their performances were electric, and nowhere was that more evident than in their signature track, Harlem Nocturne. With Jacquet's haunting saxophone and Otis's steady piano rhythm, the song oozed class and cool. It was more than a tune. It was a mood, and it solidified the orchestra's reputation as a group that could swing with sophistication and soul. But Johnny Otis wasn't one to sit still. Always hungry for fresh sounds, he began experimenting in the early 1950s with Latin rhythms, especially the mambo, which was sweeping dance floors across America. He saw a golden opportunity to blend the mambo's infectious energy with the heart and grit of R&B. That experiment paid off big with Mambo Boogie in 1951, the first R&B mambo crossover hit. It was vibrant, funky, and totally original, opening the door for future Latin and R&B collaborations. With that, Johnny Otis didn't just make history, he changed the direction of popular music. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment 1 to let us know you're still following. Sir John's Trio. When people think of Chuck Berry, they often picture a duck-walking guitar genius. But behind that driving guitar was a piano man whose rhythm never missed a beat: Johnny Johnson. Formed in the 1950s, Sir John's Trio wasn't just a background band. It was the foundation of a revolution. With Johnson on the keys, they helped build the very blueprint of rock and roll. Johnny Johnson was a master of the piano, blending boogie-woogie, blues, and jazz with effortless flair. His playing gave Chuck Berry's early hits their punch and personality. Songs like Maybelline, Roll Over Beethoven, and the unforgettable Johnny B. Good owe just as much to Johnson's rolling, rhythmic piano as they do to Berry's guitar licks. His melodies weren't filler, they were fuel, driving the music forward and adding a layer of complexity and groove that set those tracks apart. Together, Johnson and Berry created a sound that bridged rhythm and blues with the fiery energy of rock. While Berry became the face of that movement, Johnson remained the unsung architect behind the scenes. For years, his contributions were overlooked. But in 2001, justice was finally served when Johnny Johnson was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a long overdue tribute to a man whose hands helped shape the soundtrack of an era. The Five Royals. They may not be the first name that comes to mind when you think of 1950s R&B, but the Five Royals were true trailblazers. Fusing gospel emotion with doo-wop harmonies and bluesy grit, they laid the groundwork for what would later become soul and rock and roll. At the heart of their sound was guitarist Lymon, whose fiery licks and raw energy gave the group an unmistakable edge. Their early success came in the form of top 10 R&B hits like Baby Don't Do It and Help Me Somebody. These tracks weren't just catchy, they were bold, emotional, and full of personality. Pauling's guitar work added bite and swagger, hinting at the blues rock sounds that would dominate the next 2 decades. Interestingly, some of the Five Royals' most iconic songs became household hits only after others reimagined them. James Brown and Aretha Franklin turned Think into a soul standard. Ray Charles poured his heart into Tell the Truth. And Dedicated to the One I Love found new life with the Shirelles and the Mamas and the Papas. These covers revealed just how ahead of their time the Royals really were. Though they never found long-lasting chart dominance, their influence ran deep. Steve Cropper of Booker T and the MGs credited Pauling as a key inspiration. And James Brown's early work with King Records, where the Five Royals also recorded, bears the unmistakable imprint of their style. The group disbanded in 1965, but their musical DNA lives on in the grooves of soul, funk, and rock. The Rock and Roll Trio. The Rock and Roll Trio may not have topped the charts in their heyday, but they helped light the fuse for a musical explosion that would echo for decades. Born out of the vibrant Memphis scene in the mid-1950s, the trio, Johnny Burnett on vocals and rhythm guitar, Dorsey Burnett on upright bass, and Paul Burleson on lead guitar, crafted a sound that was fiery, raw, and way ahead of its time. Johnny's vocals were a perfect blend of southern grit and rock and roll swagger. Dorsey brought a thunderous energy with his slapping bass, while Burleson turned heads with his groundbreaking use of distortion and tremolo. Their chemistry was electric. You couldn't ignore them, and yet somehow the mainstream mostly did. Seeking a bigger stage, the group moved to New York City and signed with Coral Records. Between 1956 and 1957, they laid down 25 blistering tracks, capturing the heart-pounding spirit of early rockabilly. Their self-titled debut album became a cult classic, and their version of Train Kept A-Rollin' was a game-changer. That distorted guitar? It wasn't just noise, it was a glimpse into the future of rock. Though they never saw massive fame, the Rock and Roll Trio's influence rippled through rock history. From punk rockers like the Ramones to hard rock icons like Led Zeppelin, their raw, rebellious spirit lives on. Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. When Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers burst onto the scene in 1956, they didn't just arrive, they took over. With a lineup of talented young singers, Frankie Lymon, Herman Santiago, Jimmy Merchant, Joe Negroni, and Sherman Garnes, the group created a vocal harmony so smooth, so joyful, it felt like bottled teenage magic. At just 13 years old, Frankie's high, clear voice and undeniable charisma made him an instant star. Their breakout hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, didn't just top the R&B charts, it crossed over to mainstream pop, introducing America to a fresh, youthful energy. The song became an anthem for teen heartbreak and wonder, and Frankie's angelic voice became its heartbeat. More hits followed. I Want You to Be My Girl, I Promise to Remember, Goody Goody, and Little Bitty Pretty One, each one capturing the ups and downs of young love and adolescence. They weren't just voices on the radio either. The Teenagers became stars of early rock and roll cinema, appearing in films like Rock, Rock, Rock and Mr. Rock and Roll, helping to usher doo-wop into the mainstream. But fame came fast, and so did its pressures. At just 15, Frankie left the group to go solo, but his voice, now maturing, couldn't recreate the same magic. Struggles with drugs followed, and in 1968, he tragically died of an overdose at just 25. Their music paved the way for countless teen acts, from the Jackson 5 to modern pop groups. In 1993, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a fitting tribute to a group that captured the heart of a generation and helped shape the sound of rock and roll. The Isley Brothers. Long before they became legends, the Isley Brothers began their journey in 1954 as a humble gospel quartet. Brothers Ronald, Rudolph, O'Kelly, and Vernon Isley poured their hearts into spiritual harmonies, creating a sound that was both uplifting and deeply soulful. But their path was forever altered just 1 year later when Vernon, the youngest of the group, was tragically killed in a biking accident. Grief could have ended their story, but instead, it became a turning point. Determined to keep going, the remaining brothers shifted their focus from gospel to the rising sounds of R&B and rock and roll. Ronald stepped forward as lead singer, bringing a raw, emotional power to their music. In 1957, they packed up and headed to New York City in search of their big break. They recorded a few doo-wop singles, none charted, but their energy never wavered. Then came a fateful night in Washington, D.C. While performing Jackie Wilson's Lonely Teardrops, Ronald spontaneously cried out, "You know you make me want to shout." The crowd went wild. An RCA executive in the audience immediately saw the magic. He signed the group on the spot and told them, "Turn that moment into a song." And they did. Shout was born, a rollicking call and response anthem that became one of the most iconic songs of its era. It didn't chart high at first, but its power couldn't be denied. Covered by dozens of artists and still played at parties and weddings today, Shout put the Isley Brothers on the map, and they never looked back. Which of these forgotten groups surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey through 1950s music history, be sure to check out the rest of our series. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Past Not Past with fellow music lovers. Thanks for watching and for keeping the music alive.